He walked into his office expecting another routine morning, but found a little girl crying on the floor who whispered, "You're my dad." Oliver Hart arrived at the Carlyle Group headquarters just after 8, as he always did. The early morning sun reflected off the glass facade of the downtown Los Angeles building, casting sharp shadows across the sleek pavement. Inside, everything was as it should be: polished marble floors, glass walls, and employees moving with quiet urgency. As the CEO and founder, Oliver had built his company from nothing, driven by a relentless focus, discipline, and an obsession with control. Dressed in a light beige tailored suit that matched his composed demeanor, he walked through the lobby with his usual commanding presence. His brown eyes were sharp, and his expression unreadable. He was a man who had learned early in life that emotions were best left behind if you wanted to survive. To the outside world, Oliver was the perfect picture of success: a self-made millionaire, a business visionary, a man who had overcome a childhood of poverty to stand at the top. But few knew the truth, that behind the cold confidence, there was a void, something incomplete he rarely allowed himself to think about. He had no wife, no children, no one waiting for him at home. Every part of his identity had become wrapped around the company and its endless demands. He stepped into the main lobby, nodding at the receptionist without slowing down. But as he turned toward the elevator bank, something unusual caught his attention. A small figure was sitting near the far glass wall, in the corner where the floor-to-ceiling windows met the marble. It was a child. A little girl. She looked out of place, completely still, head bowed, her tiny shoulders trembling as she tried to stifle quiet sobs. Oliver froze for a moment. It wasn't a place where children ever came, especially not alone. The entire building was designed for business, meetings, and structure. Children didn't belong here. He looked around, expecting to see a parent rushing up, an explanation waiting nearby. But no one came. The girl was alone. He approached slowly, unsure what to say or do. She didn't react at first. As he got closer, he could see that she was no older than 5, maybe 6. Her dark brown hair was pulled into uneven braids, and her red dress was slightly torn at the hem. Her face was blotchy from crying, but her posture was strangely composed, as if she was used to hiding her emotions in public places. He knelt down in front of her, careful not to frighten her. "Hey," he said gently, softening his voice in a way he hadn't had to in years. "Where are your parents?" The girl looked up at him with wide, glassy blue eyes, so bright and clear they almost startled him. There was something haunting in the way she studied his face, something calm but far too mature for her age. She wasn't afraid of him. In fact, she looked like she had been waiting. Then she spoke, her voice quiet but steady. "You're my dad." Oliver blinked. For a second, he wasn't sure he heard her correctly. The world around him seemed to stop. His mind raced, searching for logic, but there was none to be found. He stared at her, stunned into silence. "What did you say?" he asked, barely above a whisper. "My mom told me your name is Oliver Hart," she replied. "She said you're my dad. But she's not here anymore." There was no trace of hesitation in her voice, only a heavy truth, delivered with the painful honesty only a child could manage. Oliver looked into her eyes again, and something deep inside him shifted, something old, something buried, something that refused to be ignored. Oliver stood frozen, still crouched in front of the little girl, the weight of her words settling over him like a thick fog. His mind was trying to process what she had just said, but it couldn't move fast enough to keep up with the reality of it. This child, tiny, tear-streaked, alone, had just called him her father. She didn't stammer. She didn't seem confused. She simply said it, as if she had rehearsed it 1,000 times. And maybe she had. He looked at her again, more carefully now. Her features were delicate, her skin pale, but there was something familiar in the shape of her mouth, the line of her brow. Those blue eyes weren't his were a deep, steady brown, but the longer he looked, the more he saw something of himself, something quiet and buried. It unsettled him. He stood up slowly, glancing around the lobby once more. Still no one. Just the hum of morning routine far on the other side of the building. He turned back to the girl. "What's your name?" he asked. "Haley," she said, without hesitation. "Haley, what's your mom's name?" She hesitated for a moment, then spoke softly. "Emily. Emily Reed." The name hit him like a strike to the chest. He hadn't heard it in years, but it lived somewhere in his memory like a locked box he'd never opened. Emily. His first real love. They had met in college, shared dorm nights, long walks, dreams about the future. She was the only woman who ever made him feel seen. But he had left for an overseas opportunity before graduation, and everything had unraveled. They tried to stay in touch, but distance, ambition, and the grinding wheel of success pulled him away. Somewhere along the line, the connection faded. He had always wondered what became of her, but never reached out. He was too focused on building his empire, chasing something he wasn't even sure he wanted. And now, standing in the middle of his empire, he was facing the result of his silence. "How did you get here?" he asked quietly. Haley looked down at her hands, then back up at him. "I took a bus. Then I walked. I knew the building from the picture." "What picture?" She reached into the small backpack beside her and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was creased and soft at the edges, as if she had held it often. Oliver unfolded it carefully. It was a printed-out photo from a business article, him, standing in front of the Carlyle Group building, arms crossed, wearing the same kind of suit he wore today. It was from a few years ago, but his name was clearly written beneath the image. Oliver Hart, CEO. "My mom showed me," she said. "She said if something ever happened, I should come find you." Oliver had no words. There was a painful tightness growing in his chest, something unfamiliar. Guilt. Grief. Shock. The words, "if something ever happened," echoed in his head like an alarm bell. "Where's your mom now, Haley?" he asked, even though part of him already knew. "She died," she said simply. "A few weeks ago." The words were like ice. He sat down beside her without realizing it, right there on the cold marble floor. He rubbed a hand across his face, trying to breathe, trying to think. His mind jumped from question to question, but nothing felt real. "Who have you been staying with?" "My aunt. But she said she couldn't take care of me. She moved away. I didn't want to go to a foster home." "So, you came here. Alone?" Haley nodded. He stared at her, stunned by the quiet strength in her voice. She was only 5. She had lost her mother. Been rejected by the last adult she knew. And somehow, she had found her way across the city with a photo in her backpack and a name in her heart. His name. There was no playbook for this. No spreadsheet. No corporate protocol. Just a child who might be his daughter, looking at him with a kind of guarded hope that made his chest hurt. For the first time in years, Oliver felt completely unprepared. But he also knew, deep in his bones, that walking away wasn't an option. He stood up and offered her his hand. "Let's go upstairs," he said quietly. "We'll figure this out together." She reached for him without hesitation. Her small fingers wrapped around his, and that one simple touch cracked something open in him that he hadn't even realized was closed. Oliver led Haley through the private elevator that opened directly to his executive floor. As the doors closed behind them, the silence between them was heavy but not uncomfortable. Haley held his hand tightly, her grip small but sure. He glanced down at her several times during the short ride, unsure of what to say, how to act, or even what to feel. She had dropped a truth on him so enormous that his mind still hadn't caught up with it. The fact that she was standing beside him now, real, alive, and apparently his child, felt like something out of a dream. Or a memory rewritten by fate. When they entered his office, she didn't hesitate. She walked slowly across the vast space, looking around as if trying to understand the world her mother had once spoken about. Oliver's office was a reflection of his life, immaculate, cold, minimalistic. It had towering glass windows with panoramic views of the city, a massive desk of dark wood, and shelves lined with awards, not family photos. There had never been space in this room for softness. Until now. "Do you want something to eat?" he asked, already moving toward the side cabinet where he kept bottled water and a few dry snacks. "Or maybe something to drink?" Haley shook her head. "No, thank you." Her politeness stung more than it should have. He wasn't used to children, but somehow he could tell she'd been taught, or forced, to grow up quickly. That realization gnawed at him. This wasn't just about her being his daughter. This was about a little girl who had clearly been through too much already. He sat down across from her at the small conference table. She sat quietly, her backpack beside her, her small legs swinging slightly from the oversized chair. "I need to ask you some things," he said gently. "Is that okay?" Haley nodded once, calm as ever. "Do you know for sure that I'm your father? Did your mom tell you anything else? Show you anything?" Haley reached into her bag again. This time, she pulled out a plastic envelope. Inside were folded documents, photographs, and a worn, faded letter. She handed them to him with both hands. "My mom said if I ever found you, I should give you these." Oliver opened the envelope slowly. Inside was a photograph of him and Emily, taken during their last year in college. He didn't even remember it being taken. They were sitting on a bench, her head on his shoulder, both smiling, looking young and invincible. Next came a copy of Haley's birth certificate. His name was not listed as the father. But the timing matched exactly. Then he saw the letter, handwritten, with ink smudged in some places, as if it had been handled many times. It was from Emily. "Dear Oliver. If you're reading this, it means Haley found you. I hope that wherever life took you, you found peace and purpose. I never meant to keep her from you. I tried to reach out, but I couldn't find you. And after a while, I thought maybe it was for the best. You were building something great. I didn't want to be a burden or complicate your life. But now, I know that Haley needs you. She's strong, brave, smarter than I ever was. And I'm not going to be here to watch her grow up. I didn't plan for this. I didn't want this. But I trust that you'll do the right thing, not because you have to, but because somewhere deep down, you're still the man I loved. Emily." Oliver's hands trembled slightly as he folded the letter. A storm of feelings surged inside him, grief for Emily, guilt for not trying harder to stay in her life, and a growing, overwhelming sense of responsibility for the girl sitting across from him. Haley was watching him closely. She didn't ask if he was okay. She didn't speak at all. She just waited. He cleared his throat and said softly, "Would it be all right if we did a test? Just to be sure. A DNA test. Not because I don't believe you, but because I need it to be official." Haley nodded. "Mom said you would want that. She said it's okay." She wasn't offended. She wasn't hurt. She understood more than most adults would. Within the hour, Oliver had called his private physician to arrange for a discreet and expedited test. While they waited, he moved her into a guest suite at his home. He didn't want to send her to a hotel or keep her in the office. It felt wrong. She needed stability, and for now, that meant staying with him. That night, after he tucked her into the enormous bed in the guest room, a bed she looked comically small in, he stood in the doorway and watched her for a long time. She didn't ask for a bedtime story or a nightlight. She didn't ask where her toys were. She simply said, "Good night," and turned away. He went to his own room but couldn't sleep. His thoughts ran wild, images of Emily flashing in his mind, the sound of Haley's voice saying, "You're my dad," on loop in his memory. He stared out at the city lights for hours, wondering how everything had changed in a single morning, and how, somehow, it all felt more real than anything he'd built in his perfectly controlled life. The next morning, Oliver woke early, but he hadn't really slept. He had spent most of the night pacing his room, going over everything he had learned, everything Haley had said, and everything that had been left unsaid. He felt like a stranger in his own life. The towering ceilings, the pristine hardwood floors, the silence of his penthouse, all of it felt cold now, as if it belonged to someone else. He hadn't realized how hollow it all was until a child had walked in and filled it with something he hadn't known he was missing. He showered, dressed in a clean suit, and headed downstairs where he found the housekeeper, Maria, already preparing breakfast. She greeted him as usual but paused when she saw his expression. Before she could ask anything, he simply said, "There's a little girl upstairs. Her name is Haley. She'll be staying here for a while." He didn't explain. He wasn't ready to. He found Haley sitting quietly on the edge of the bed, fully dressed, her backpack already zipped. She looked up at him as he entered, then looked back down, as if unsure what she was allowed to do. The sight of her sitting so still, so quiet, tugged at something deep in him. "You don't have to be packed," he said softly. "You're not going anywhere." She looked up again, this time with a flicker of uncertainty. "Are you sure?" He nodded. "Yes. I'm sure." They ate breakfast together at the long dining table, a table that had never once been used for anything other than corporate dinners. Haley ate slowly, her manners impeccable, as if she didn't want to be any trouble. Oliver watched her more than he ate, trying to understand how a child so young could carry herself with such control. It was unnatural. And that realization made him ache in a way he couldn't quite name. By mid-morning, the doctor arrived. The DNA test was simple and quick, just a cheek swab. Haley didn't flinch. She sat calmly and cooperated without question. Oliver signed the paperwork and arranged for the results to be expedited. He was told it would take no more than 48 hours. The waiting would be unbearable, but he understood it was necessary. After the doctor left, he sat with Haley in the living room, unsure what to do next. "I need to ask you something else," he said gently. Haley nodded, waiting. "Why now? Why come find me now?" She hesitated, her eyes falling to her hands in her lap. "Because there was no one else." Her voice was steady, but he could hear the pain behind it. "My aunt said I had to go stay with people I didn't know. That it was too hard for her. She said it wasn't her job. So I waited until she left for work, then I packed my things and took the picture and the letter. I had the address. I just went." Oliver swallowed hard. A 5-year-old, navigating buses and city streets, completely alone, all to find someone who might not even want her. The fact that she had done it without fear, without hesitation, it terrified him. What kind of life had she been living? What had she been forced to accept as normal? "Did your mom ever talk about me? About the past?" Haley looked up, eyes bright but calm. "She said you were smart. That you were busy building something. She never said anything bad. She said if I ever needed you, you'd come through." Oliver looked away for a moment, trying to gather himself. Emily had protected his image, even when he hadn't deserved it. She hadn't told Haley about his silence. She hadn't filled her head with bitterness. She had just given her daughter hope. And now, Haley had placed all that hope in him. He spent the rest of the day trying to keep her busy. They went to a bookstore, and he let her choose whatever she wanted. She picked a collection of fairy tales, a beginner science book, and a small red journal. At lunch, they sat at a small cafe on a quiet street, and he noticed the way she scanned the room constantly, always watching the exits. She wasn't just cautious. She was prepared. Like someone who'd had to take care of herself. That night, he read to her from the fairy tale book she had chosen. His voice was awkward at first, stiff and unfamiliar in this new role, but she didn't seem to mind. She lay still under the blankets, watching him without interruption, her expression unreadable but open. When he finished, he closed the book and looked at her. "Is it okay if I stay until you fall asleep?" he asked. Haley nodded once, and after a pause, she said, "You don't have to try so hard." He blinked in surprise. "What do you mean?" "You're already different from what I thought." "In a good way." He didn't know how to respond. All he could do was sit beside her, stunned by the weight of her words, and wait until her breathing slowed and sleep took her. When he left the room, he closed the door gently behind him and leaned against the wall in the hallway. For the first time in years, Oliver Hart wasn't thinking about his company, or his investors, or the next deal. He was thinking about a little girl who had come to find him, and how everything he thought he knew about himself had already begun to change. The DNA results arrived 2 days later, delivered in a plain envelope by a private courier. Oliver held it in his hands for several long minutes before opening it, standing in the silence of his office at home, his heart pounding like it hadn't in years. He had faced multi-million-dollar negotiations, lawsuits, and public scandals without blinking, but this small envelope carried a weight none of those things ever had. When he finally tore it open and read the document, there was no dramatic twist. The results were clear and undeniable. Probability of paternity, 99.99%. Haley Reed was his biological daughter. He sat down slowly at his desk, staring at the paper, feeling something strange wash over him. It wasn't shock, he had already accepted it in his heart. It wasn't fear, though some part of him still worried he didn't know how to be a father. It was something more overwhelming than either, responsibility. Not the kind he was used to, where failure meant money lost or deals broken. This was the kind that meant everything, that reached into the deepest part of who he was and demanded he be someone better than he had been. He found Haley in the sunroom, sitting cross-legged on the floor, coloring in her new journal. She looked up as he entered, her face calm but quietly curious, as always. He knelt down beside her and held out the envelope. "It's official," he said. "You're mine." She stared at the envelope, then at him. "I already knew," she said. "But now you believe it too." There was no smugness in her tone, no triumph. Just a gentle certainty that somehow made him feel both humbled and proud. He didn't realize he had started to smile until she smiled back. From that moment on, everything changed. He hired a child therapist, not because he thought something was wrong with Haley, but because he wanted to understand how to support her. He started rearranging his schedule, canceling meetings, moving calls, delegating work that previously he never would have trusted to anyone else. His assistants were stunned. The board raised eyebrows. But Oliver didn't care. For the first time, something mattered more than the empire he had built. He enrolled Haley in a nearby private school with a small student-to-teacher ratio and a focus on emotional development. He personally met with the principal, walked the halls with Haley before her first day, and made sure she had a backpack she actually liked, not the one they had picked for her at the department store, but the one she found in a tiny shop downtown, decorated with galaxies and stars. He learned quickly that being a father didn't mean grand gestures. It meant remembering which night she liked spaghetti, and which night she preferred soup. It meant noticing when she was quiet for too long and learning to ask the right questions, not too direct, not too vague. It meant letting her keep the small routines she brought with her, like lining up her shoes before bed or hiding her favorite pencil under her pillow, because those routines had once made her feel safe. He also began to ask more questions about Emily. Over the weeks that followed, pieces of Emily's life began to unfold. Through conversations with Haley, and later with a woman named Kara, Emily's old friend who still lived in the city, he learned how hard she had worked to raise Haley alone. Emily had been a teacher, passionate and kind, but always struggling to make ends meet. When she got sick, she kept teaching as long as she could. She had hidden her illness from almost everyone, including her own sister, until it became impossible to hide. Haley had watched her mother deteriorate slowly and painfully. She remembered the hospital. She remembered the way Emily tried to smile, even when she couldn't sit up. And she remembered the day her aunt picked her up and told her she couldn't stay anymore. The full weight of that truth nearly broke Oliver. Not because it made him feel guilty, though it did, but because he hadn't been there. He hadn't even known. While he was closing deals and attending galas, the woman he once loved was dying, and the daughter he didn't know he had was learning how to survive without anyone. One evening, as they were cleaning up after dinner, Haley looked up from the dishes and asked, "Did you love her?" Oliver stopped, his hand frozen around a plate. He looked at her and saw not just curiosity, but a real need to know. "Yes," he said after a pause. "I did. I was young and stupid and too focused on the future. But yes, I loved her very much." Haley nodded and went back to washing without saying anything else. That small exchange, like many between them, felt like a stone placed carefully into a foundation they were building together, slowly, deliberately, with patience. By the end of the month, Haley had started smiling more. She laughed, really laughed, when she beat Oliver at board games or when Maria, the housekeeper, taught her how to make pancakes. She stopped sleeping with her shoes next to the bed. She no longer flinched when the doorbell rang. And one night, as Oliver walked past her room to check on her, he heard her humming. It was the same melody Emily used to sing when they were in college. That night, he sat alone in the dark living room, thinking about how far they had come in such a short time. He still didn't have all the answers. He still worried he would fail her. But he also knew one thing with absolute certainty. He would never walk away again. It had been nearly 2 months since Haley first appeared in the lobby of Oliver's office building, and already his life looked and felt completely different. What once had been a precisely scheduled, business-driven existence had shifted into something warmer, more unpredictable, and, for the first time in years, meaningful. The sleek surfaces of his home now carried traces of a child's presence: picture books stacked on the coffee table, colored pencils left on the kitchen counter, and a red backpack hanging from the coat rack that used to hold nothing but his tailored overcoats. His life was no longer about quarterly reports and market forecasts. It was about learning who his daughter really was and how to become the kind of man she could rely on. One quiet afternoon, Oliver took Haley to visit the public library. It wasn't far, just a short drive through their neighborhood, but she lit up the moment he mentioned the idea. She loved books, loved reading them, flipping through them, even smelling them. That kind of enthusiasm was new to him. He had spent years reading only out of necessity, absorbing financial reports and legal briefs. But with her, reading became something different, something intimate. That day at the library, she pulled him toward the children's section and asked if they could sit together on the floor and read one of the picture books out loud. He did. He read to her with all the awkwardness of a man learning a new language, and she laughed when he gave the animal characters silly voices. He laughed too. And something in that laughter cracked open the last remaining part of him that had resisted change. That night, when Haley was already asleep, Oliver found himself scrolling through an old drive of personal files. Hidden among folders of contracts and speeches was a long-forgotten set of photos from his college days. Pictures of him and Emily. They were both so young in those images, full of hope, full of ideas, full of a future they never had time to finish. One photo in particular caught him off guard. It was a candid shot, Emily resting her head on his chest, his hand lightly brushing her shoulder, both of them smiling at something just outside the frame. He stared at it for a long time, overcome with the feeling that he was looking at the beginning of a story he hadn't realized he was still living. The next day, he made a decision. He called Kara, Emily's best friend, and asked if she would meet him for coffee. She agreed, a little surprised, but curious. They sat at a small cafe near her workplace, and Oliver, still not used to being vulnerable, spoke plainly. "I want to know more," he said. "About Emily. About those years I missed." Kara's expression softened. For the next hour, she told him stories. About how Emily had worked 2 jobs to support herself through school after he left. About how she'd never spoken ill of him, even when she was struggling. About how Haley had inherited her mother's resilience and her quiet stubbornness. Emily had never given up on life, even when her body began to. She had written letters she never sent, kept photos in a box under her bed, and once said that if she died before Haley met her father, she hoped the man he had become would be better than the one he used to be. The words hit Oliver with quiet force. He left the cafe that day with a clearer picture of the woman he had once loved and a deeper sense of the gift, and the responsibility, he now held. Back at home, he began making small but meaningful changes. He redecorated one of the guest bedrooms into a space just for Haley. He let her pick the colors, lavender and soft gray, and filled the shelves with books, science kits, and art supplies. He installed glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling after she told him, shyly, that her mom used to say stars help chase nightmares away. He cooked dinner more often, sometimes with her, sometimes for her, and though his culinary skills were limited, she always smiled and said it tasted better than takeout. She began to trust him in small, subtle ways, asking him to tie her shoes when the laces got knotted, holding his hand when they crossed the street, leaning on his shoulder during movie nights without a word. It wasn't perfect. There were still moments when she got quiet and distant, when a sound or smell brought her back to a memory she didn't talk about. But he learned not to push. He learned to sit beside her in silence, to wait until she was ready, to make her feel safe by simply being consistent. Then, one evening, she came to him with a worn envelope in her hands. "This was the last letter Mom wrote," she said. "She said to give it to you when I felt like you were ready." His throat tightened as he took it. The letter was dated just weeks before Emily died. In it, she wrote about how much she had hoped they'd reconnect one day. She told him to be patient with Haley, to listen more than he spoke, to understand that love wasn't something that had to be perfect, it just had to be present. She told him she forgave him. That she still believed he had the heart to be the father Haley needed. Oliver read the letter twice, then folded it carefully and held it against his chest. He didn't cry, but he felt something deep inside settle, like the final piece of a puzzle had clicked into place. That night, he tucked Haley in as usual, but before turning off the light, he asked her quietly, "Do you think your mom would be proud of us?" Haley didn't even hesitate. "I think she'd be proud of you. And I think she'd be really happy I found you." He smiled, kissed her forehead, and turned off the light. As he stood in the hallway, listening to the soft rhythm of her breathing, he realized something profound. He hadn't just inherited a child. He had inherited the second chance he never thought he'd get. And this time, he wouldn't waste it. The seasons began to change, and with them, so did Oliver. He had once measured time in contracts, market trends, and quarterly profits, but now he found himself marking days by simpler, more human moments: Haley's first science project at school, her growing obsession with constellations, the way she began humming to herself while drawing, something she'd never done in the beginning. Every morning, she would come into the kitchen wearing mismatched socks and carrying a new fact she had memorized from a book, and he'd pretend he didn't already know it, just to hear her explain. She had become the center of his world without even trying, and it no longer scared him. It made him feel alive. Oliver's staff had noticed the change. His executive assistant stopped triple confirming his calendar because he no longer worked until midnight. He left board meetings earlier, declined unnecessary trips, and began pushing for more flexible schedules for employees with families. It hadn't gone unnoticed. At first, people whispered about him, wondered if he'd lost his edge, but then they saw something else. The company's culture had started to shift. Morale improved. People smiled more. There were fewer resignations, fewer burned-out managers. The transformation of one man's heart had quietly begun to reshape the empire he had built. But the biggest shift came when Haley brought home a note from school. Her class was holding a family day, a tradition where students invited their parents or guardians to visit the classroom, talk about their jobs, and share something personal. Haley handed him the invitation with an uncertain look, as if she wasn't sure he'd say yes. Oliver took the paper and studied it. He had given hundreds of speeches, faced reporters, analysts, and CEOs. But standing in a room full of children to talk about who he was, not as a businessman, but as Haley's dad, felt like the most intimidating thing he'd ever agreed to. When the day came, he wore a simple navy sweater instead of a suit. Haley beamed when she saw him walk into the classroom. The other children were buzzing with excitement, and their parents, some in uniforms, others in casual clothes, mingled around with relaxed smiles. Oliver felt completely out of place. But then Haley took his hand and guided him to her seat like it was the most natural thing in the world. When it was their turn, she stood beside him and introduced him to the class. "This is my dad," she said confidently. "He builds big buildings, but now he builds time for me too." There was a murmur of laughter, and a few parents smiled in quiet understanding. Oliver couldn't speak for a moment. Then he cleared his throat and began talking, not about stock markets or real estate portfolios, but about how important it is to listen to people, to give second chances, to never be too busy for the ones you love. He didn't mention the past, didn't tell the story of how they met. That was Haley's story to tell, if she ever wanted to. But he looked at her as he spoke, and she looked back at him like she already knew everything he was trying to say. Afterward, they walked out of the school into the golden light of afternoon. Haley skipped a little, her hand still in his. "You did good," she said. He smiled. "You did better." That weekend, he did something he hadn't done in decades. He took a trip with no agenda. Just the two of them, a rented cabin in the mountains, a telescope, and a sky full of stars. At night, wrapped in blankets on the porch, Haley pointed out constellations while he listened. She spoke with the joy of someone who had found her place in the universe. And for the first time in his life, Oliver felt like he had too. Back in the city, he began planning something more permanent. He reached out to his lawyers and drafted an official guardianship agreement. He wanted Haley to know, without any doubt, that he was hers and she was his, not by accident or biology, but by choice. When he showed her the paperwork and explained what it meant, she didn't cry or gasp. She just leaned into him and said, "I already knew." In the following days, he also began developing a new branch of his foundation, named in honor of both Emily and Haley. It would provide educational resources and emergency housing for single-parent families and children in crisis. He poured his heart into it, not as a legacy project, but as a way to turn everything he had learned into something lasting for others. His life, once full of noise, had found its rhythm. There were still meetings, deadlines, and expectations, but now, they were balanced by bedtime stories, school pickup lines, and weekend pancake mornings. And every now and then, when he passed a photo of Emily on the hallway shelf, a photo Haley had chosen and framed, he would pause, touch the edge of the frame, and whisper a silent thank you. For giving him a second chance. For giving him their daughter. For believing he could become the man he never thought he'd be. Spring came slowly that year, not in the weather itself. Los Angeles had little change in seasons, but in the feeling that settled over Oliver's life. It was in the quiet warmth of mornings that no longer began with email alerts, but with the sound of Haley's small footsteps padding into the kitchen, asking what kind of pancakes he planned to ruin today. It was in the way sunlight filtered through the curtains of her lavender bedroom, catching the drawings she had taped to the walls, stars, animals, buildings, a stick figure version of him with "My Dad" written underneath in uneven letters. He had once measured success by the height of his buildings and the size of his numbers. Now he measured it in how many days he could make her laugh before breakfast. One Sunday morning, they sat together at the kitchen island, sharing a bowl of fruit and planning their day. Haley wanted to visit the planetarium again. She'd been obsessed with stars for months now, and Oliver promised they would. As she listed out everything she hoped to see, he found himself marveling at how much she'd changed in such a short time. There was still a quiet wisdom in her, a depth he knew had come from loss, but now there was also light. She giggled, she asked 100 questions a day, she rolled her eyes at his jokes, and she had started inviting friends over for weekend crafts and movie nights. Her world had expanded beyond survival, into curiosity and connection. Later that day, as they walked through the museum's grand dome and watched the simulated night sky spread above them, Oliver caught himself looking at her more than the stars. She pointed up, explaining constellations to a group of tourists like a tiny professor, completely unaware of the way people watched her, drawn to her presence. She had Emily's passion, his steadiness, and something entirely her own, an ability to make people feel like they belonged, just by being near her. In those moments, he often wondered if Emily could see them. If she knew that the girl she had raised with so much love and strength had changed everything about him. After they got home that night, Haley curled up beside him on the couch, her head on his shoulder, and they watched one of those old animated space movies she loved. She fell asleep halfway through, and he stayed there, holding her gently, not moving, not wanting the moment to end. As the credits rolled, he thought about how much had happened in the span of a single year. A child had walked into his office and told him she was his daughter. His past had cracked open like a fault line, and what had come out of it wasn't ruin, it was redemption. He remembered the early days, the silence between them, the way she slept fully clothed with her shoes by the bed, just in case. He remembered how she had watched people so carefully, always scanning for exits, always listening for danger. Now she fell asleep beside him with her face relaxed, her shoes forgotten, her dreams finally uninterrupted. Not long after, the court date came for the finalization of the adoption. Even though the DNA proved their bond and he was already her legal guardian, Oliver wanted the papers to reflect the truth he now lived daily, that she was his in every way that mattered. Haley insisted on wearing a white dress with little blue stars on it, and she clutched the same worn photo of Emily she always kept in her backpack. They sat in the courtroom together, surrounded by the quiet hum of legal formality, but for Oliver, it felt like a ceremony. A promise sealed in ink and law, but rooted in love. When the judge signed the final document, Oliver didn't cry. He just turned to Haley, took her hand, and said, "It's official now. You'll never have to wonder again." Haley smiled up at him, her blue eyes filled with the same calm certainty she had shown that very first day. "I never wondered. But I'm glad it's written down." That evening, they celebrated with cake and a few close friends at home. The dining room, once a place for polished dinner parties and business strategy, was now cluttered with balloons, hand-drawn cards, and loud laughter. Maria, the housekeeper who had become like a grandmother, wept openly while holding Haley's shoulders, and Oliver, standing in the middle of it all, felt something he never expected, complete. Not powerful, not proud. Just whole. He walked into his office later that night, the only quiet room in the house, and picked up the letter Emily had written him, now kept in a glass frame on his desk. He read it again, as he often did when he needed her voice to steady him. She had asked him to show up for Haley not out of guilt or obligation, but out of love. And he had. Not perfectly, not instantly, but fully. He whispered a thank you into the silence and turned off the light. Months passed, and the rhythm of life continued. School, birthdays, slow Sunday mornings, late-night science talks, beach trips, and bedtime stories. Oliver no longer checked his phone during dinner. He no longer counted his success in assets or influence. He counted it in memories. He counted it in the number of times Haley fell asleep mid-sentence, trusting he'd be there when she woke up. And he always was. One summer evening, as they lay on a blanket in their backyard, staring at the sky through a telescope, Haley turned to him and asked, "Do you think Mom would have liked all this?" Oliver looked at her, then back up at the stars. "I think she would have loved it," he said. "Especially you." Haley smiled and rolled onto her side, curling into him the way she always did when she was ready to fall asleep. And as the night air cooled around them, Oliver felt something settle in his chest: peace. The quiet kind that only comes when you know you've finally become the person you were always meant to be. This story is a testament to the idea that sometimes the most unexpected disruptions in life are not accidents, they're invitations to become who we were always meant to be. What began as a tale of wealth, loneliness, and control evolved into something far more human, a journey toward redemption, connection, and unconditional love. The most powerful transformation wasn't external. It wasn't in the company, the house, or the court papers. It was inside Oliver himself. He didn't just become a father, he became present, vulnerable, and real. The ending doesn't rely on a dramatic twist or a grand gesture. Its strength lies in its quiet honesty, the image of a once distant man lying under the stars with his daughter, answering her question not with performance, but with truth. That kind of peace, the kind that's earned through pain, growth, and deep listening, is rare. And it stays with you. This isn't just a happy ending, it's a meaningful one. Because it reminds us that healing doesn't erase the past, but it gives it purpose. And that love, when chosen every day, can rewrite even the most broken story.